The prairie wind moved like a whisper across the dying grass, carrying the smell of dust and something faintly metallic, like rusted iron. She rode into that wind, hat brim pulled low, a duster coat shifting with each sway of saddle. Her horse was a rangy, sweat-slick roan, ribs visible beneath its hide, yet its pace never faltered. Together they crested a ridge, and below lay the town, a scatter of weather-beaten buildings clinging to life at the edge of nowhere, their windows shuttered against more than just dust storms. She pulled the reins, paused to take in the scene, and let her hand drift near the worn leather holster on her hip. The town was quiet, too quiet. Even from a ridge, she could see figures darting behind curtains, faces pressed to glass, vanishing like prairie ghosts. A lone dog slunk across the street, ribs sharp under its matted fur. Somewhere, a sign creaked on rusty hinges. She clicked her tongue softly, and the horse descended toward the main street, hooves clopping on hard-pan earth. The sound carried far in the silence, like a warning bell. By the time she reined in at the center of town, a few men had emerged from the shadows. One leaned against the post outside the saloon, hat pulled low, toothpick rolling between his teeth. Another rocked lazily in a chair, shotgun resting across his knees, his gaze steady but not hostile. They watched her like men watch a storm cloud, wary but unwilling to flinch. She swung down from the saddle, boots hitting the ground with a soft thud, spurs jingling. Her coat was long enough to hide the revolver, but the outline of it under the fabric was plain. The saloon door creaked when she pushed it open. The scent of cheap whiskey, sweat, and old tobacco smoke clung to the air. A piano in the corner stood silent, its keys yellowed and chipped. At the barkeep was polishing a glass that didn't need polishing, his hands trembling just enough to betray his nerves. She walked with slow, deliberate steps, the kind that made a room hold its breath. "What'll it be?" His voice was soft, like he'd forgotten how to speak above a whisper. "Whiskey." Her voice was even low, a sound that didn't ask but told. He poured the drink with a shaky hand, sliding the glass across the bar. She caught it without looking at him, her eyes scanning the dim room. Two card players sat in the back, one nursing a black eye, the other staring holes through his hand of cards. The man at the bar shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward a wanted poster nailed crooked to the wall near the door. It showed a face she didn't recognize, but the words below it were clear enough. The Black Vultures, wanted dead or alive. She lifted the glass, savoring the sharp burn of the whiskey. "They been through here?" The barkeep's hand froze on the counter. "Who?" "You know who." A pause. The only sound was the creak of a ceiling fan, moving too slow to stir the heavy air. Finally, he swallowed hard and nodded toward the poster. "They're everywhere, like buzzards over a carcass. We just try to keep our heads down." She turned back to her drink, her face unreadable. Her reflection in the dirty mirror behind the bar showed a woman hardened by miles and loss, features carved sharp by wind and grief. Her hair was tucked under her hat, strands dark as a raven's wing, and her eyes carried a weight that made men look away first. The saloon door banged open. Sheriff Harlan stepped in, boots scuffing the floorboards. He was older than she remembered, his hair gone silver, his badge tarnished but still pinned straight. His gaze found hers immediately, and for a moment the noise of the world, the fan creak, the clinking glass, fell away. "You shouldn't be here," he said finally, voice gravelly from years of dust and smoke. She turned slightly on the stool, one hand still wrapped around the glass. "And yet here I am." His jaw tightened. "Last I heard, you were riding far from this kind of trouble." "Last I heard," she said evenly, "you were keeping order." He didn't rise to the jab. Instead, he studied her in silence, like a man trying to read a storm's path. "You're not here for whiskey." "No, you're here for them." She nodded once. Harlan exhaled heavily, removing his hat and setting it on the bar. "They ain't like the others you've gone after. They're all the same in the end." "No," his voice hardened. "These men aren't just killers. They're wolves. They'll take this whole town apart piece by piece if you push 'em." Her lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile. "Then I'd better make it quick." Harlan studied her a long moment before lowering his voice. "There's a bounty on their heads, but I know that's not why you're here." She didn't answer. "You still chasing ghosts?" Her hand tightened slightly on the glass. The silence that followed was answer enough. He sighed and shook his head. "You'll end up buried out there like all the rest." "Maybe." She stood, leaving the drink half finished. "But not today." As she turned to leave, the sheriff's voice followed her, softer now, almost weary. "They got a man watching the town. He's out there right now. Don't make a move till you know which shadow he's hiding in." She paused, tipped her hat slightly, and walked out into the dying light. The sun was low, a dull orange disk sinking into the horizon, casting long shadows across the street. She untied her horse and swung into the saddle, eyes scanning the rooftops and alleyways. Somewhere out there, a set of eyes was watching her every move. She could feel it, a prickle at the base of her neck, the kind that comes before a bullet finds its mark. Her hand rested on the grip of her revolver. She let the reins slacken, allowing the horse to move at a slow, lazy pace as she studied the silent town. On the balcony of the saloon, a curtain fluttered slightly. A figure shifted in the narrow alley between the general store and the blacksmith shop. She guided her horse toward the alley, her movements unhurried. The figure tried to melt back into shadow, but the angle of the light betrayed him. A glint of steel, the edge of a rifle barrel. She drew in one smooth motion, the revolver clearing leather-fastened. The man could lift his gun. The shot cracked the stillness like a whip, and the figure crumpled into the dirt. Her horse snorted and sidestepped, ears flicking nervously. She dismounted, revolver still in hand, and approached the man. He was young, barely more than a boy, with fear wide in his fading eyes. "Who sent you?" Her voice was cold, flat. His lips moved, struggling for breath. "Vultures know you're here." Blood bubbled at his mouth, and then he went still. She knelt briefly, prying a silver emblem from his coat pocket, a crude carving of a bird's skull. She turned it over in her hand, expression unreadable, then slipped it into her coat. From the saloon balcony, Harlan watched silently as she swung back into the saddle. The dying sun caught the barrel of her revolver, and for a heartbeat, she looked like something pulled from a dime novel, all shadow and firelight. She spurred her horse forward, dust rising around her as she rode out of town without looking back. Behind her, the wind carried whispers of her name, and in the distance, storm clouds were gathering over the horizon. The hunt had begun. Dawn came pale and sharp, bleeding light over the empty street, like a blade drawn slow from its sheath. The lady Gunslinger stood alone outside the saloon, her breath misting faintly in the cool air. Her hand hovered near her revolver, thumb grazing the worn leather of her holster. The town still slept, or at least pretended to, shutters tight and doors barred. The silence was not peace. It was tension wound, so tight it might snap at any second. Boot steps crunched against gravel. A boy, no more than 17, swaggered out from behind the livery, a revolver twirling clumsily in his hand. His grin was crooked, reckless, but his eyes were sharp with fear he was trying to hide. "You're her," he said, voice cracking with both youth and nerves. "The lady everyone whispers about." She didn't move. "Put that gun down." His grin widened like a mask. "You killed one of ours yesterday. They said I'd earn my stripes if I sent you to hell." Her gaze drifted to the sky, pink and lavender streaking the horizon. "You won't get the chance." He moved first, a twitch of his shoulder telegraphing the draw. Her revolver cleared leather in a blur, the crack of the shot echoing off buildings before his finger could tighten on the trigger. The gun flew from his hand, spinning into the dirt. He clutched his bleeding wrist, stumbling back with a curse. She walked toward him, slow and deliberate, smoke curling from the barrel of her gun. "Go home." He spat in the dirt, defiant even in pain. "They'll gut this town for you. You hear me? The vultures don't forget." She crouched, close enough to smell his fear. "Then they'd better remember my name." He faltered under her gaze. She turned her back on him, holstered her weapon, and mounted her horse. He scrambled away, clutching his wound, disappearing into shadow of the buildings. The message had been sent. The vultures would know she was coming. By midday, she was riding hard, the town shrinking behind her as the land opened wide and empty. The air tasted of dust and sagebrush, and the sun bore down mercilessly. She followed faint signs. A bent twig here, a boot print pressed into dry earth, the remnant of a campfire scattered to disguise its presence. These men moved like predators, but she had learned to track predators long ago. Hours passed. The land grew harsher, rocks jagged like broken teeth rising from the earth, gullies cutting deep scars into the plains. She dismounted at a shallow stream, letting her horse drink while she knelt to study the ground. She found a scrap of cloth snagged on a thorn bush, a piece of black fabric marked with a crude bird skull stitched in red. Her jaw tightened. The trail led her to a homestead, or what was left of it. The house was little more than a charred skeleton, the smell of smoke still clinging to the air though the fire had long since died. A wagon lay overturned nearby, one wheel shattered. The silence was thick and oppressive, broken only by the call of a raven perched on a fence post, its glossy feathers catching the sun. She dismounted, revolver drawn, and approached cautiously. The front door hung from one hinge, swinging slightly in the wind. Inside, the walls were blackened and broken glass crunched beneath her boots. She found them in the back room, a woman clutching two small children, all alive but gaunt with fear. The woman's eyes widened at the sight of her, but she didn't scream. She looked past the gun, past the hat brim shadowing her face, and seemed to recognize something familiar, someone who had seen this kind of horror before. "They came 2 nights ago," the woman whispered, her voice trembling. "Said they'd be back." "Where'd they go?" The woman's lips quivered, but she pointed east, toward the jagged silhouette of distant hills. "They took everything," she said. "Food, livestock, left us with nothing." Her eyes darted toward the children, who clung to her skirts silently, their faces pale and hollow. The gunslinger reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a small pouch of jerky and hardtack, laying it on the floor. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Stay hidden," she said softly, her voice low but steady. "They won't come back for you." The woman looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief, as though she'd seen a ghost come to life in front of her. The gunslinger holstered her weapon, turned, and stepped back into the daylight. By nightfall, she had made camp near a cluster of boulders overlooking a valley. A small fire flickered low, throwing dancing shadows across her face as she sat cross-legged, methodically sharpening her knife. The wind carried the distant sound of coyotes, their cries blending with the rustle of dry grass. She leaned back against a rock, pulling a silver locket from her coat pocket. It clicked open to reveal a faded photograph. A man with a warm smile, his arm around her shoulders. Her thumb brushed the glass, and for a moment her eyes softened, grief slipping through the cracks of her hardened exterior. She snapped the locket shut and stared into the fire. The flames reflected in her dark eyes as she replayed the boy's words in her mind. The vultures don't forget. Neither did she. She had followed this trail for months, chasing rumors and whispers, hunting the men who had burned her life down to ash. Each lead brought her closer, but each step also deepened the weight in her chest. The quiet knowledge that revenge might not be enough to fill the void they had left. The fire hissed as she tossed a twig into the coals. She reached for her revolvers, laying them across her knees, and began checking the chambers one by one. The ritual was calming, steel and powder, the steady click of metal on metal. A raven landed nearby, its head tilting as it studied her. She stared back at it, the firelight painting its feathers in shades of copper and black. The bird cawed once, sharp and cold, then flew off into the night. She doused the fire and sat in darkness, her back to the boulder, listening. The wind whispered across the land, carrying faint sounds. A horse snorting in the distance, the creak of leather, the muffled laugh of a man trying to stay quiet. Her hand moved slowly toward her revolver. They had followed her. She crouched low, sliding silently along the ground, moving like a shadow among rocks. Moonlight glinted off a rifle barrel up ahead. A man crouched near a bush, his attention fixed on her extinguished fire. He never saw her coming. The soft crunch of her boots was the last sound he heard before she pressed the barrel of her revolver against his skull. "Drop it," she whispered. The rifle clattered to the ground. "Where's your camp?" He hesitated, breath shallow. She tightened her grip, and he froze. "Mining camp," he rasped. "Old shaft. North Ridge." "How many?" "Too many," he muttered, sweat dripping down his face. She knocked him out with the butt of her gun and dragged him into the shadows. His horse snorted softly as she untied it, tethering it away from camp. The horizon was rimmed with black clouds now, the smell of coming rain thick in the air. She pulled her hat low, scanning the darkness, her mind already working to the terrain she'd seen earlier, the ridges and gullies that would either save her or get her killed. She returned to her horse and mounted, her silhouette merging with the night. The storm wind carried the scent of dust and lightning, and with it came a certainty. The vultures knew she was close, and they would not wait long to strike. The canyon walls closed in like jagged jaws, their shadows stretching long under the weight of a darkening sky. The gunslinger reined in her horse and studied the land ahead. The air smelled of iron and coming rain, thick enough to taste on the tongue. She slid from the saddle, boots crunching gravel, and crouched to examine the faint trail that cut between the rocks. Hoof prints. Fresh. Too many to count, layered over one another like a tangle of snakes. Her eyes narrowed. This was no simple path. It was bait. She led her horse forward slowly, every nerve sharpened to a razor's edge. The canyon swallowed sound, muting the jingle of her spurs and the creak of leather. She stopped beneath an overhang, scanning the high ridges. The silence was wrong. Too still, too heavy. She loosened her revolver in its holster, fingers brushing the cool metal grip. A pebble skittered down a slope to her left. That was all the warning she got. Gunfire split the air. She dove behind a boulder as bullets sparked against the rocks, her horse screaming and bolting down the trail. Dust and gunpowder filled her lungs as she rolled to her knees, drawing her weapon in a single fluid motion. Two men appeared on the ridge above, rifles flashing in the dim light. She fired once, twice. One crumpled backward, his body vanishing over the ledge. The second man ducked low, shouting to someone she couldn't see. A bullet grazed her shoulder, the heat of it burning through her coat. She bit back a curse and slid deeper into cover, reloading with quick, precise motions. The canyon echoed with shouts now, boots pounding on stone. More of them. She ducked low and sprinted for another boulder, heart thudding steady as a drumbeat. She counted 3 voices, maybe 4. She fired again, ricocheting a shot off a rock face. One man yelped and tumbled forward, his rifle clattering. A third man charged her position, shotgun raised. She pivoted, dropped to one knee, and fired point blank. He fell hard, dust clouding around him, his hat rolling away into the wind. She breathed slow, steady, the way she trained herself. Every shot counted. Every breath mattered. Blood trickled down her sleeve, but she ignored it. She had faced worse wounds and worse odds. Another shot cracked. The bullet struck the boulder inches from her head, stone chips slicing her cheek. She spun and fired upward, catching a glimpse of a fourth man perched above. He toppled backward, arms flailing. Silence followed, broken only by the echo of his fall and the faint roll of distant thunder. She crouched low, scanning the canyon. No more voices, no more movement, just her breath, harsh and even, and the distant rumble of her horse's retreat. She moved cautiously, revolver steady, checking each body. The fourth man still clung to life, gasping, his leg twisted unnaturally beneath him. She knelt beside him, gun leveled. His face was pale with pain, fear etched deep in his expression. "Where's your camp?" she asked. He coughed, blood staining his teeth. "You think this ends with me?" She pressed the barrel lightly to his chest. Steady but calm. "Answer." His lips trembled. "Old mine. North Ridge. He's waiting for you." His gaze shifted, some mixture of awe and terror in his fading eyes. "He knows you're coming." His chest rose once, then stilled. She holstered her gun and straightened, breath clouding in the cooling air. Her shoulder throbbed, blood sticky against her coat, but she ignored it. She had what she needed. Retrieving her horse took nearly an hour. The animal had bolted a quarter-mile down the trail, sides lathered with sweat, but calmed when she approached. She whispered to it softly, running a hand along its neck, her touch steady. She cleaned her revolvers as she rode, one-handed, using the rhythmic task to quiet her mind. The sun dipped lower, swallowed by thick storm clouds gathering in the west. Lightning flashed faintly, illuminating the ridges ahead. She rode with purpose, every muscle taut, every sense alive. The mind wasn't far now, and she could feel the weight of it, a pull in her chest like gravity dragging her forward. By the time she reached a ridge overlooking the camp, dusk had fallen. She tethered her horse in a thicket and crawled on her belly through scrub and rock until she could see the valley below. Lanterns flickered among the ruins of old mining shacks, their glow pooling like molten gold against the darkness. Figures moved between them, armed men, their laughter carrying faintly over the wind. She counted at least 8, maybe 10, and knew there were more inside the mine. At the center of it all stood a larger structure, the old foreman's office, still intact. Smoke curled from its chimney, and shadows moved across its windows. She didn't need to see his face to know he was there. The man she'd been hunting, the one who had torn her world apart. Her jaw clenched as memories pressed in like ghosts, flames consuming her cabin, the scent of gunpowder and pine. His laughter, low and cruel, echoing over her husband's body. She shut her eyes briefly, steadying herself, pushing the memories back into their box. Rage was a weapon, but only if she kept it sheathed until the moment was right. She slid back from the ridge, settling against a boulder. The storm rolled closer, wind carrying the scent of rain and lightning. She unbuttoned her coat, freeing her movements, and reloaded her weapons with deliberate care. Every action was ritual, checking each cartridge, tightening the strap of her holster, running her thumb over the familiar grooves of her revolvers. She flexed her injured shoulder, testing its strength. Pain lanced through her, sharp and hot, but bearable. She'd fought through worse. The wound was a reminder. Every step on this path had been paid in blood, hers and theirs. The first drops of rain fell, spattering against the rocks, hissing as they hit her campfire scars from nights past. She tilted her head back, letting the cool water wash grit and dry blood from her face. The world smelled of wet earth and gun oil. In the distance, the gang's laughter rose again, carried on the wind a taunt. They thought themselves untouchable, buried deep in their fortress of ruin. That would change before dawn. She rose and adjusted her hat, pulling the brim low against the rain. Her silhouette merged with the darkness as she moved silently along the ridge, circling the camp to study every angle. She counted sentries, memorized paths, noted where the shadows fell deepest. Every detail mattered. A lantern flickered in the wind, casting a brief glow over the valley floor. For an instant, she saw her reflection in the glass of a broken window, hollow-eyed, rain-slick, a specter of vengeance. She stared at herself, unflinching, and then turned away. By midnight, she was back on the ridge where she'd started, crouched low as thunder rolled overhead. The rain had turned steady, soaking her duster, plastering her hair to her face. She didn't move, didn't shiver. She was still as stone, a hunter waiting for her moment. Below, the camp settled into a drunken quiet. Lanterns burned low, men slumped near fires, rifles propped carelessly against walls. Only 2 sentries paced the perimeter now, their shoulders hunched against the cold. She rested a hand on the grip of her revolver, feeling the storm's electricity hum in her bones. Her breath was slow, controlled. The time for waiting was almost over. She closed her eyes briefly, picturing the man inside the foreman's office. The storm broke as she reached the edge of camp, thunder shaking the valley like cannon fire. Rain hammered the earth, washing dust into rivulets that ran between her boots. She moved through the shadows with predator's patience, every step deliberate, every breath measured. Ahead, a sentry hunched beneath the awning of the shack, rifle cradled loosely in his arms, his hat pulled low to shield his eyes from the storm. He never saw her. A flash of lightning split the sky, and in that instant her revolver whispered once. The man dropped soundlessly, swallowed by the rain. She dragged his body into the dark and slipped closer to the heart of the camp. Lanterns flickered in the gale, their flames struggling against the downpour. The vultures were scattered, half asleep, confident in their numbers, their laughter from earlier now replaced by the low murmur of men riding out a storm. She passed the foreman's office and caught sight of him through a cracked window. Broad shoulders, a scar carving down his cheek, his face just as she remembered from that night. He sat at a desk, cleaning a revolver with slow precision, his posture unhurried. He wasn't hiding. He was waiting. Another sentry turned the corner ahead of her. She ducked behind a wagon, pressed flat against its dripping boards, and waited for his boots to splash past. The moment he passed, she slipped behind him and swung her gun, dropping him into the mud with a wet thud. She took his rifle and slung it over his shoulder, but kept her revolver ready. She advanced, crouched low, weaving between rusted machinery and collapsing beams. The rain masked her steps, but the crack of thunder nearly cost her. A door slammed open, and a man stepped into the storm, lantern held high. Their eyes met. She fired first. The glass shattered, plunging them both into darkness, and he crumpled into the mud with a grunt. Shouts erupted across the camp, voices sharp with alarm. She sprinted for cover as bullets split the night. Muzzle flashes lit the rain in staccato bursts, each flash revealing men spilling from the shacks, rifles raised. She ducked behind a broken cart, reloading swiftly, her hands steady despite the chaos. Her revolver barked twice, and 2 silhouettes dropped. Another shot grazed her leg, hot pain searing through muscle, but she stayed low, pushing forward, her breast steady, eyes fixed on her target. The storm became her ally. Wind drove sheets of rain sideways, turning the valley into a haze of mist and shadow. She used it, moving unseen, fire with precision. Each shot was a judgment, each kill deliberate. Men cursed her name into the storm as they fell, and still she pressed on, a relentless shadow cutting through them one by one. She reached the foreman's office and kicked the door open. Lightning illuminated the interior for a heartbeat. Overturned crates, a rifle propped against the wall, maps scattered across the desk. And him. He stood slowly, a giant of a man with a revolver already in his hand, his smile sharp as a knife. Well, he drawled, his voice deep, calm even as gunfire crackled outside. The ghost herself. She said nothing, only leveled her gun at his chest. Been wondering when you come knocking, he continued, stepping around the desk, movements unhurried. You think you're the first to try? You ain't. I'm the last, she said softly. His smile widened. You're fast. I'll give you that. But you're angry. Anger makes your hand shake. Her expression didn't change. Try me. They circled each other. The storm's roar muffled by the thick walls. The world narrowed into 2 figures and the weight of the guns in their hands. He was confident, steady, his eyes sharp. She studied him with the calm of a predator, breathing slow, her finger brushing the trigger. A bolt of lightning lit the window, casting them both in stark relief. The crack of thunder masked the sound of their guns. They fired almost simultaneously, but her shot was truer. He staggered, surprise flickering in his eyes before rage overtook it. He raised his gun again, but she was already moving. She sidestepped, fired twice more. He collapsed against the desk, blood painting the maps beneath him. Silence settled heavy in the room, broken only by the rain pounding the roof. She approached him slowly, gun still trained on his chest. He coughed, blood bubbling at his lips, and met her gaze with a sneer. You think this ends with me? His voice was a rasp, weaker now. It ends with you, she said, and fired once more. His head slumped forward, the sneer frozen on his lips. She holstered her revolver and scanned the office quickly. The maps were marked with red ink, routes and hideouts circled. Evidence of the gang's reach. She took what she could carry, shoving the papers into her coat. Then she saw it. A small silver locket sitting on the desk, half buried under a pile of spent cartridges. Her breath caught as she picked it up. She opened it with trembling fingers, and there he was, her husband, smiling softly from a tiny photograph. The sight hit her harder than any bullet, a wave of grief and fury twisting inside her. She closed it gently and slipped it into her pocket. Outside, the gunfire had dwindled. The men who hadn't fled were dead or dying. She stepped back into the rain. Her duster plastered her frame, her hat brim dripping water. The storm had washed the camp into a ruin of mud and bodies, lanterns extinguished, the valley reeking of gunpowder and blood. She moved methodically through the camp, checking each man, taking their ammunition, gathering anything useful. Her wound ached, but she ignored it, her focus steady. She worked like a soldier, efficient and silent, her expression carved from stone. When she reached the center of camp, she struck a match. The fire caught quickly, licking at the broken wagons and collapsing shacks. Soon the entire camp was ablaze, smoke and rain twisting together into a black, choking haze. She watched for a moment, the flames reflecting in her dark eyes, and then turned away. The storm began to break as she mounted her horse. Dawn's first light bled through the clouds, painting the wet earth in shades of silver and gold. She rode to the wreckage without looking back, her silhouette cutting a stark figure against the pale horizon. The valley behind her burned, a funeral pyre for men who had carved their legend in blood and cruelty.